Hello, and glad you could join me today. We are going to talk about needle theory, how the needle configurations and how needles respond in the skin. The success of every procedure depends on the sharpness, the quality, and the configuration you choose for each area of the face. And to do that, you need to have a proper understanding of what the needles are and what needles you will use for each procedure. So today we're going to first go over groups or configurations. That's the shape that the needles are in. So I'm going to show you a picture. Here is a little chart that we hand out in our classes. And this kind of goes over the configurations, some of the common ones. So this is each individual needle here. Those are our round configurations. We have flats, we have stacks, we have magnums. So each one of these are the needles looking head on at those. And we'll go back over to another chart here. This is a more detailed chart of a lot more configurations. There are one rounds. That would be more for your detailed work. It's also really great for scalp micropigmentation. We go down to, we have shaders. Shaders are going to be in a round configuration, but the needles are spaced more apart. That will help you do more of a shading versus a liner. Your needles are closer together and they give a more distinct line and distribute the ink in a straighter line for you. And then we go into our flats and then our magnums. Magnums are double stacked. They are great for covering large areas such as lips. Some people do use magnums for filling in brows, for shadow brows as well. We have a blush brush here. We as women would never look at the blush brush and think we are going to apply a beautiful eyeliner with this. It's way too large. There's too many bristles on there. This is to cover a large area. Now this is the same with a mag, a 16 mag. We would never grab a 16 mag needle configuration to do a small eyeliner. It would be like trying to do an eyeliner with a blush brush. Same as we would never grab a small angled eyeliner or brow brush and try to put our entire eyeshadow and cover our full eyelid with this. That would take a very long time. Now we could probably get it done, but it would take a long time. And if we were to choose too small of a needle configuration for, say, we're doing lips and we grab a 3 liner, it would take a lot of time to get your lips done and you would be shredding the skin and overworking the skin. When you overwork, then you're releasing pigment. So you can see the importance of grabbing the right needle configuration. Also, please keep in mind that tight groupings, such as liners, will shred the skin if not used correctly and if you overwork them. So you do want to make sure if you're shading an area that you will be using a 5 shader instead of a 5 liner. Next, I'm going to go over the gauge of the needle. The gauge is the measure of the size of a wire. So a needle is a wire that starts at a particular size and then is sharpened up to a point. The average tattoo needle gauge is known as a 12 gauge needle, which is a 35 millimeter. The caliber of needle is best known for thoroughly depositing pigment into the dermis. Its large circumference allows more pigment to collect over its surface while also creating a larger pinpoint marking. Although the amount of pigment delivered is greater, so are the risk of trauma. So larger needles mean more friction. More penetrating friction leads to more trauma and hindered healing, while other smaller gauge needles, such as the 8 and the 10 gauge, they allow for less trauma, but the compromise is finer pinpoints Therefore, less pigment is deposited, as well as a higher risk of migration. So you do need to be aware of what type of gauge you want for which procedure. So such as our bug pins, which is about our eight gauges, that would be really great for scalp micropigmentation because we want those tiny little hair follicles. We don't want to use a larger gauge such as this trying to create a small hair follicle. And as I had gone over, the 12 gauge is pretty much the standard, and we'll go over where you will find on the packaging of where you can find what the gauge of your needles are in your configuration. Sometimes that is not on the packaging. If it's not on the packaging, you will need to call the distributor. Next, I am going to go over tapers. There are standard tapers, long tapers, and extra long tapers. This is the length in which the smallest point is formed on the needle from the largest point on the wire. So our standard taper, it's more for dense filling. It distributes ink evenly, and greater quantity of pigment marks are larger and more prominent. Our long and extra longs are used for contouring and shading. They introduce less ink, and ink doesn't smudge, which allows for better control of color gradation, and they leave fine, thin marks. So the one rule is just to make sure that when you're using different tapers that you are aware of your pressure. So just envision this being the skin. You can see that you could use the same pressure and only that much is going into the skin. But when you're using an extra long taper, that it's very easy to go further into the skin because of how thin the taper is. So just as you are getting used to different tapers, be aware of that and make sure that you are not tearing the skin or going too deep. Now let's go over how to read your blisters or packages when all of this information is put together. So your first number is going to tell you the gauge of the needle. So if we break this up, this is what your packaging, you'll see this on your packaging. So we're going to teach you how to read that. So your first number is the gauge of the needle. So we have a 12 gauge. The second numbers are going to be how many needles there are. So we have 5 needles. And then your third number is going to tell you what configuration you're working with. So a round liner. So we'll go down to our second one. We have an 8 gauge. We have 3 needles. And this one would be a round shader. So our needle configurations with the shader, our needles are going to be spaced further apart than with our liners. And we'll come down here. We have a 12 gauge. We have 9 needles, and this one would be a Magnum. And then one other thing on your blister packaging is always make sure that you check the integrity of the blister package. So each package is going to show you if they've been sterilized. So this one tells you it's initially pink. Once it's been through the process in the gas to sterilize the needles, then it turns yellow. So we know this one's good. There's no punctures, nothing on that, so that would be safe to use. If anything's opened, if it has not been sterilized properly and it's not changed to the color that it needs to be, you do not use it. It is not safe, it's not sterilized, and it needs to be thrown away immediately. I hope all of this information is helpful for you today. If you guys have questions, feel free to always message us or comment below, and we're always here to help.